This is an original painting out of my head, and we'll be painting it in gouache. For this painting, I'm using Hahnemühle cold press postcards, Daniel Smith gouache, Etcher gouache paint brushes, and Daniel Smith masking fluid, which has some added applicators. The first thing I did was do a concept composition sketch. Then I figured out my foreground, midground, and background. F for foreground, M for midground, and B for background. Then I worked out my path of light, not really a value painting, just something to show where the shadows will fall. Next, I created a value chart with black, 2 shades of gray, and a tint, and then white will be the white of the paper. And then I did a value painting. Again, I really recommend that you do this yourself. It's time to mix up the colors. Mix each of the colors with black, then separate some of that and add white to match the gray value, and then add more white to mix the lighter gray value, and then take each of the original colors and mix them with white to make the tint. Cover the boy, the dog, the moon, the snow right behind them, and some snow on the trees with masking fluid. Let the masking fluid dry completely. Use a flat brush size 8. Paint the entire card with the blue-black mix. Let it dry completely. Pencil in the trees. With the dark green mix, paint the midground and background trees. Let them dry completely before moving to the next step. Use the middle green mix to paint the lighter portion of the trees on the sides that are facing the moon. The trees that are right in front of the moon, the ones just off to the side will have a lot more light. The ones right in front, you want both sides to be lit. Let them dry completely before moving to the next step. Add some middle blue to the areas behind the boy, up around where the trees are. A lot of what we're doing now will end up being covered up when we adjust at the end, but you'll want hints of this showing through. It will make a difference if you add this now. The next step can blend into this a little bit, so let it dry, but you don't have to let it dry as long. Now add some of the middle blue mix. Let the middle blue dry, but again, it won't matter if it blends. Add some of the tint, blue tint, and let it dry completely. Add green tint to the side of the trees that's facing the moon. As with the darker green, when you get into that part of the trees that are right in front of the moon, you'll have some green tint on both sides of the trees. Add some areas of blue tint in the area behind the boy. Make sure that you don't cover up all of the dark and middle tones that you've added before. You want to get a sort of complex mix of these various colors. I decided that I wanted more of the light colored snow than I had in my value painting. That's one thing to remember. You're always free to make changes. That value painting's a guide more than an absolute rule. Let this all dry completely and remove the masking fluid. Switch to the size 4 round brush and cover the entire boy and his clothing with dark red. Don't worry about details at this time. Let it dry completely. Next, add the middle red. I had technical difficulties with the clip here, so you'll just have to look and see what I did when I had finished with that red. Then you're going to be putting the red tint on for your highlights. I was at a bit of an odd angle with doing the video and ended up doing this face more than once. That's the nice thing about gouache. If you don't like what you have, let it dry thoroughly and then just paint over it. While the face is drying, we'll get started on the dog. I'm using the red-black mix because the dog is going to be a white and brown dog, but we'll start with this really dark base and paint over. Let it dry. Apply middle blue to the dog in the areas where there's going to be white. Let it dry. Highlight some areas with the blue tint so that the dog will stand out from the middle blue in the background. Now that everything's been painted, it's time to evaluate. We'll be softening some of those areas where the masking fluid was, and we will be making some value changes depending on what we like or don't like. Wet a piece of Kleenex tissue or a rag or even a brush and tamp down around the moon. We're going to give it a little bit of a glow. While it's still wet, load your brush with a little bit of the blue tint and paint it over the moon. Use the same blue tint and start softening the snow areas around the trees. Switch to the green tint when you start doing the trees that are a little closer up. Switch to middle blue, the middle blue mix. We're now going to start tying things together a little bit by having a little bit of all the colors everywhere throughout the painting. At this point, your painting may be different enough that you won't need to do some of the things I'm doing. I'm evaluating what I'm seeing. I'm looking for places where I can even out the values or the change between values. Maybe I want it to be softer or I might want it to be more harsh. If you want an area to blend more, then go ahead and paint like one color and then paint the other color next to it, sort of dragging the two colors together. If you want it to be harsher, then paint your change, let it dry, and then add any other change that you want so that it won't blend. Add some areas of the middle red to the dog. If you think that the dog needs to stand out a little more, add a little bit of either blue tint or actual white between the legs and around the body where needed. If you think you need it, add some blue tint to the trees. This again is to help tie everything together. Add a little bit more of the blue tint to the dog if you think he needs it. Add some dark blue, let it dry. Add some middle blue, let it dry. Add some blue tint, let it dry. Don't worry if you get monster face because you can paint over it. Play around until you get the values right so that it shows where the chin, the shadow on the cheek. When you feel that that is right, then you can worry about the eyes and the nose and the mouth. Evaluate your painting again at this point. I decided that the composition would be better if I had more dark towards the middle to kind of give it that curve that's in there, so I darkened some of the trees. You may or may not need to do this, but now's the time to look and to make that decision. Now work in some red in various places. Put a little bit in among the trees. a little bit in the snow, a little bit those front trees, just so there's a little bit of red throughout the entire painting. The red will look a bit out of place, but we'll soften that after we put this down and let it have a chance to dry. While the red in the background dries, now's the time to finish up the face. Mine needed a little darker value. If you wish, pencil in the eyes, nose, and mouth, and then paint over it. Once you're finished with the face and the red in the background has dried, it's time to soften the red. I used dark green in the trees, and I actually used white in the snow. This is going to be kind of the last step, and so I used white in all the places that I wanted to be the very brightest. If you're watching this on YouTube, there is a written version at Doodlewash. The link is down in the description below. I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial. Thank you for watching.